Hi, before the video starts, I want to address that this video was scripted before the Dudelox posted his video, also on Flip Monsters. I cover similar things to his video, but offer some differing views. Please check out his video afterwards if you want to see his perspective on Flip Monsters. Now, let's get to the video proper. My name is A. Salomon, and today I will be redeeming my honor. When I made my video regarding retro monsters, I didn't evaluate the new Prediction Princess support correctly, and it turns out you can just cheat out Tera Trave from the graveyard with Tera Trave. Thank you, Konami, for creating problem-solving card text to make cards less ambiguous. Anyways, Tera Trave allows you to summon any flip monster from the deck when it is flip face up, which allows you to summon floodgates from the deck, namely Guard Dog and Whirlwind Weasel, that locks your opponent from special summoning and using spells and traps, respectively. One will be summoned on your turn, another during your opponent's draw or standby phase, and both will be flip face up together using Tera Trave, allowing both floodgates to become live if they resolve successfully. While impressive, you must understand that you need to play those floodgate flip monsters as garnets, since Tera Trave can only summon them from the deck.
Now Perry will vomit down your throat.
And you need to open a decent hand in a ritual deck, with a decent hand being a Manju, a pre-prep, and 3 other extenders.
You know, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
Theoretically, this setup can be greatly improved if there comes a day where better ritual support is released, and ritual decks become much more consistent and require fewer cards. As such, I want to find out what makes a viable flip monster and a good flip monster archetype. So, what is a flip monster? This sounds like the most redundant question to any Yu-Gi-Oh player that has seen one before. Who is this question for then? Perhaps new players being introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh?
To destroy your face down.
Or maybe even a meta sheep who has never heard of a flip monster before. Well, I was actually asking Konami because somehow they failed to classify their Koala as a flip monster on their official English database. Regardless, flip monsters just need to be tagged with flip, and for some reason, only sometimes have an effect that starts with flip. This is different from other monsters being flip summoned or being flip face up. Flip monsters belong to a specific category of monsters, whereas a card being flip summoned requires the action to be done in an open state of the main phase, and a card being flip face up will simply be turned over, whether by flip summoning, by battle, or by card effect.
Pop it! Twist it! Pull it!
Man, that looks easy.
Have it! Sure, it looks easy! Pop it! But it's not!
The last two are not as relevant to this video, but it's the difference that allows Alistair the Invoker to activate its effect after damage calculation, while Manju of the 10,000 Hands does not. Flip monsters have access to a few staple cards such as Book of Tayu, Book of Moon, Soul and Luna, and World Legacy Pawns. However, I want to discount them from this discussion, except World Legacy Pawns for Krawlers, since they do not come out naturally when playing an archetype, and is incredibly luck dependent if you open up with them. Anyways, flip monsters can be grouped into 3 broad groups: archetypal, non-archetypal but notable, and absolutely worthless. Flip monsters need to be set onto the field and flip face up afterwards to activate their flip effects. If their effects are not huge payoffs, it would not be worth going through the effort of using them at all. So, the same rule applies here as it did in the Spirits video. You may assume that any card not mentioned has never been created. Let's start with the non-archetypal but notable monsters first. There are 5 generic flip monsters that can be and are already abused by Prediction Princess. These 5 are Guard Dog, Whirlwind Weasel, Paw of the Forbidden, and sometimes Searchlight Man and Sonic Jammer. As mentioned earlier, Guard Dog and Whirlwind Weasel can knock your opponent out of special summoning and using spells and traps for the turn. Searchlight Man and Sonic Jammer are in the same vein, preventing your opponent from setting cards for the turn and from using spells until the end of the next turn, respectively. Paw of the Forbidden allows you to choose one of 4 strong effects to activate, namely Paw of Greed, Giant Trinate, Raigeki, and the Fossil Sentry.
Are you sure about that?
These 5 have extremely strong and potentially game-winning effects tied behind the flip effects, which is why Prediction Princess decks already use them. One thing you have noticed is that Prediction Princess does not abuse any flip monster that is part of an archetype, such as Krawlers, Shaddolls, or Subterrors. These monsters do not have broken flip effects as they are designed to perform better within their own archetype instead. However, the only exception to this is the walking skill drain called Deus Ex Crawler that also just happens to be a level 9 monster. Looking back on notable flip monsters not in an archetype, They were restricted by their lack of synergy with other monsters as they are not part of an archetype. This meant that they are allowed to have strong or even game-breaking effects tied to a mechanic that required time to be activated. We can see that flip monsters are bound by 3 aspects of gameplay. While modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards are normally bound by 2, namely power level and consistency, flip monsters are bound by a 3rd aspect, which is speed. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards can typically be used immediately, whereas flip monsters need to be set face down first to activate their flip effects. This aspect also affects trap cards, but they will be discussed in this video. Now, let's take a look at the different archetypes that focus on flip monsters. Krawlers is an archetype of level 2 Earth Insect flip monsters that intend to swarm the field with flip monsters that push advantage with each flip effect. Spine destroys 1 monster, Accent destroys 1 spell or trap, Receptor searches a Krawler, Guile special summons a Krawler from the hand or graveyard, and Renvier recovers Krawlers from the graveyard. The archetype also uses link monsters to push for better damage and uses Deus Ex Krawler to set up a board-wide monster negate.
Wait a minute. Who are you?
As mentioned earlier, Krawlers is supported by World Legacy pawns that allows the archetype to repeatedly flip face up or face down. One thing to take note is that flip effect Krawlers have 2 effects. One flip effect and another effect if they are removed from the field by your opponent's card effect while face up.
Don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid? Don't you feel a little ashamed?
This second effect further allows board swarming and allows you to keep using flip effects, but heavily relies on your opponent. While Krawlers is not meta defining, we can take a look at 2 other flip archetypes that did make meta cards, namely Subterrors and Shaddolls. Subterrors is an archetype of earth monsters with different levels and different types. The archetype consists of Subterror Behemoths, which are all flip monsters, Subterror Nemesis, which are not flip monsters, and finally Subterror Hellspawns, which intend to give your opponent PTSD. The Subterror playstyle that allowed it to be meta relevant is called Guru Control, that uses Subterror Guru to search for Subterror Finders as a negate, all while playing multiple traps and flight gates. This playstyle uses very few flip monsters, often only Subterror Guru and sometimes Umastrix as a targeted banish. Subterror Guru has 2 effects. Its flip effect lets you search for a Subterror card. Its other effect is equally important since it flips itself face down with another monster. Either another flip monster on your side,
Get down, Mr. President!
or as an interruption on your opponent's turn.
Surprise! But set. Oh! 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 You derpy motherfucker! You stupid! You think you can just come in here and take my shit?
Subterrors is further supported by their field spell, the Hidden City, and the trap card, Subterror Final Battle. The Hidden City allows you to flip up Subterror monsters once during your main phase, or once during your opponent's turn to negate an attack, whereas Subterror Final Battle allows you to choose one of 4 effects per copy of Final Battle, choosing between flipping Subterror monsters face up, face down, making them gain attack and defense based on their combined stat total, or making Subterror effects unable to be negated for the turn.
Pop it! Twist it! Pull it!
While Guru Control uses very few flip monsters but has its focus on flip effects, modern Shaddolls is the direct opposite of that. Shaddolls currently uses plenty of flip monsters but do not focus on changing the battle position of their flip monsters. Shaddolls is a fusion archetype that focuses on sending their flip monsters to the graveyard using card effects, typically using their multiple fusion spells such as Shadow Fusion and El Shadow Fusion. Shadow Fusion monsters all have effects that activate if they are sent to the graveyard, with Shadow Flip monsters having a stricter requirement of being sent to the graveyard by card effect. While not all Shadow Flip monsters are used, those that are used primarily give advantage in removing your opponent's cards, adding cards to your hand, or creating a bigger board presence. These effects are often tied to their effects when sent to the graveyard and not their flip effect.
Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantical.
It is not to say that Shaddolls do not use their flip effects, or do not have the ability to use their flip effects on turn 1.
I have osteoporosis.
As most notably Shadow Falco, now Shadow Ariel, and Shadow Wendy are being used as extenders for their combo chains. The issue instead lies with the difficulty in changing the battle position of Shadow monsters, as Shaddolls would need to rely on sinister shadow games which is not searchable, or Rest Shadow Incarnation, which is on a hard once button graveyard effect. As a result, modern Shadow decks forgo heavy investment into their flip effects and instead rely on their graveyard effects and fusion boss monsters instead. Based on these three archetypes, we can see that there already exists some issues when making a strong flip effect focused archetype. Each deck seems to be lacking in at least one aspect of gameplay. Krawlers keep a low speed while keeping decent power and consistency, while Subterrors have sacrificed their consistency for great speed and power. Shaddolls do have immense power and consistency, however they do not have great speed since they only have decent access to their flip effects. They have a much faster access to their graveyard effects, and as a result are played with a focus on their graveyard effects instead. Putting aside Krawlers, Subterrors and Shaddolls, there are a few more archetypes with heavy focus on flip effects. Jar cards are notably used in empty jar strategies that aim to deck out your opponent, but they do not have archetypal support and heavily rely on staple cards and luck.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Penguins have two flip monsters, namely Penguin Soldier and Penguin Ninja. Penguins aim to set up No Penguin and Penguin Brave to activate Soldier or Ninja during your opponent's turn and banish either two monsters or two spells or traps. Penguins can be a viable deck to play, but is stopped by their low power ceiling and lack of recovery. Worms are absolute horseshit due to their lack of synergy, low power ceiling, and lack of recovery. Their only saving grace is their unsearchable trap card W Nebula Meteorite that could give you an extremely huge advantage, but even that requires you to have already set up multiple worm monsters on the board. The last archetype I want to talk about is Tintangles. Theoretically, this archetype can create a huge board presence and has great recovery. However, this archetype is far too slow to get started on turn 1 and can only simply set one flip monster, maybe a few traps, and pass your turn. To get around this, Stairs of Mail exists and can let you change the position of your Tintangle monsters. The huge problem for this card is that it is not searchable and not recoverable in archetype and cannot be reliably used for combo plays. Saying you have a full Tintangle combo with Stairs of Mail is no different from saying you have Manju and pre-prep for a ritual combo.
Small loan of $1 million.
Simply put, Tintangles have sacrificed their consistency for speed and power, Penguins have low power ceiling in exchange for speed and decent consistency, Jar cards have low speed and low consistency for extremely powerful effects, and Worms fail at every single aspect. So, after listening to me talk about how expensive cardboard can be orientated on your $300 custom-made Life Twin playmat, how can a viable flip monster or good flip archetype be designed going forward? Non-archetypal flip monsters can still remain inconsistent in my opinion, but they need to keep strong or even game-winning effects to make up for their lack of synergy. Although they will likely be abused by Prediction Princess going forward, it will be the only way a straggling flip monster will see any form of play in the modern Yu-Gi-Oh format.
Fucking slaves, get your ass back here!
But for a flip archetype, each flip monster needs to have synergy within the archetype. There needs to be ample searching or setup available to allow consistent boards to be made. The archetype should also include at least two ways to flip monsters face up and face down like Subterrors, with at least one that can be activated during your opponent's turn. These cards need to be easier to access, unlike Stairs of Mail for Tintangles, and cannot be bottlenecked to one card like in Krawlers. Each flip monster should also have at least two effects, one flip effect and one other effect for recovery or for utility. The flip effect should not be game winning, although still rewarding to be used. Otherwise, you'll just see another Guru control deck with extremely few flip monsters. These non-flip effects should also be within the player's own control, instead of waiting for the opponent to take the initiative and meet a specific condition like in Krawlers. It sounds like I'm requesting for an ideal archetype, with the perfect set of effects and high consistency. However, I want flip archetypes to be focused on their flip effects, and not their other effects. One major concern I've been hinting for some time is the core identity of flip effects on flip monsters, whether in an archetype or not. While I have mentioned the issue regarding the usual power, consistency, and speed of flip monsters, what role should the flip effect play on a flip monster? Given that two monsters don't even have a flip effect and are still considered flip monsters, what good would a flip effect serve at all? This may sound like a crazy idea, But maybe, just maybe, having a flip effect or the flip attribute should tell you that you have to flip face up flip monsters. Flip should let the player know that the flip monster or its archetype is meant to be flip face up to activate one of its effects.
Okay.
Case in point, why I'm ragging on Shaddolls a lot. Being a flip focused archetype, there should be clear support enabling and promoting flip effects, instead of being an afterthought.
Oh, that's good. I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
However, Konami has designed Shaddolls in a way that has seemingly placed their flip effects as an afterthought, as they are usually better than their non-flip effects, but not immensely better to make it worth a player's time and effort. Shaddolls are officially a flip monster archetype, but with their support focused away from their flip effects, there will be practically no functional difference between giving Shaddolls if this card is flip face up instead of a flip effect. The only difference is that Shaddolls can interact with any card that directly supports flip monsters. But what is the point when the flip effect is not the focus of the archetype? Can you really say that they are flip monsters? Another characteristic of flip effects is that it should be a distinct way to separate the activation requirements of monster effects. What I mean by this can be seen from the news wave of Ninja support. Ninja monsters used to include several flip monsters, but the news wave of Ninja monsters are no longer flip monsters despite having effects that rely on being flip face up. One thing you can notice is Konami placing alternative activation requirements for the same effect, one being special summon and the other being flip face up. In terms of card design, there should not be an alternative method to activate the effect that you want placed behind the flip effect. Being this prohibitive, Konami can attract players to use flip effects by adding significantly stronger effects behind this activation requirement. As it stands now, flip effects as a mechanic need setup time as their trade-off. With limited ways to flip multiple monsters face up during your turn, let alone your opponent's turn, a flip effect focused deck would not be reasonably able to use all set monsters' effects in a turn, unless they have a very specific tag card. Additionally, flip monsters need to wait for the next chain after they have been flipped face up to activate their effects. If a deck sacrificed time for their effects to be live, don't you agree that a decent payoff should be awarded to make it fair?
You're too slow!
Let's try to address the speed issue of flip monsters in another way. Maybe flip decks can slow down the game state to match their own tempo. The poster boy of this will be Guru Control that plays multiple floodgates and staple negates to slow down the game to a favourable position.
Yes, I've done steroids, and yes, I am on steroids, monitored and managed by a trained hormone clinician.
Instead of focusing on self-improvement, Guru Control has decided that his mantra is that he would drag everyone down with it, aka the same words you said when you were edgy and 14. I am not a huge fan of easy to access or generic floodgates and would argue that floodgates should require a greater hurdle to access, and not dependent on where you decide to sit at your locals that day, which just happens to align with the balls of rocks in outer space and align with the positive feng shui in the room that you and a few dozen other people are sharing at the same time. Just so you open up your skill drain or one of the 10 different staple floodgates you decided to bring that day. Generic floodgates will not solve the fundamental issue of flip monsters, and instead will just make the game worse off for everyone. The more obvious problem with generic floodgates is that stun decks can just choose to play other cards with immediate payoff, such as Inspector Border or Thunder King Ryo instead of any flip monster or flip archetype. How about in-archetype floodgates then? I would say yes! But only if it requires more than a single spell to become active. A card like Deus Ex Crawler is more ideal as it takes much more setup to become active, as opposed to using a single fusion spell to summon El Shaddol Winda from your extra deck. The floodgate could be tied to an archetypal spell or trap to minimize Prediction Princess abuse, and the floodgate can have an activation requirement related to the archetype itself to prevent other decks from using it, such as discarding one card from the archetype. The main idea at the end of the day is that flip archetypes need to be internally sustainable and not reliant on generic tools that can be better used in other stun decks. If that can be achieved, the game can be slowed down and you will still feel less guilty than flipping up a single skill drain and winning the game because of it. Maybe skill drain should just be reclassified as a flip monster so it becomes less played in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Come on, step it up!
Flip monsters face two major issues, being the lack of viability and the puzzling identity of flip effects. Konami consistently designs flip archetypes to fail at one or more aspects of gameplay, whether it is through the lack of power, lack of consistency, or the lack of speed, which all drag down how viable flip archetypes end up being. Konami also fails at having a clear vision of what flip effects and flip monsters should do. Should they become simple surprises for the opponent? Should they be game-winning effects to compensate for their time investment? Or should they be put to the sideline in favour of more conventional effects? I've discussed earlier what the ideal flip archetype might be, but that is ultimately just my own opinion on the matter. I also considered that flip monsters should focus on flipping face up and down as their core gameplay, and that flip archetypes can entertain the idea of having their archetypal floodgate as long as it is archetype specific. But at the end of the day, Konami will have the last say, as they are the one who will design and print the cards. With that in mind, Konami has consistently been able to design strong or even game-breaking archetypes as of late because of their lack of inherent restrictions. But when it comes to a group of cards that inherently have restrictions, such as Ritual, Spirit, or Flip monsters, Konami often falls short of making them viable due to one or more key issues. If Konami ever intends to make Flip monsters viable, Konami will need to give considerably strong or even game-breaking effects to Flip monsters or their support cards in order to overcome the restrictions when designing a Flip monster. The likelier way that Konami will go for will be something similar to Shaddolls instead, where the flip effect is secondary to another desired effect. But if that happens, I want to ask the same question again. Can you really say that they are flip monsters? Maybe that is why Konami failed to classify Death Koala as a flip monster.
Kept you waiting, huh?